What is up, hockey fans? Welcome to the Wraparound, brought to you by the Hockey News and presented by Sticks.com. I'm your host, Emma Lingan. I'm joined today by Kelsey Surmacz and Michael Augello, and we are coming at you to talk about all of the latest and greatest from around the NHL. Bite-sized storylines, yes, they are still happening even in the dog days of the offseason, and we're going to talk about all of it today. Before we do want to remind you that we are brought to you by our good friends at Sticks.com. Why break the bank on sticks when you can get pro level composite sticks without the pro price tag at Sticks.com? That's STIX.com. Head over now and gear up. All right. Well, like I said, dog days of summer, dog days of the off season here, but we've still got some things to talk about here, you guys. We've got the new CBA was recently ratified. We touched on that a bit last week. We're going to get into some more of the nitty gritty this week. But first, do you want to talk about the draft, the decentralized draft, which was definitely a hot topic, hotly debated topic this year. I know the media in particular, not a huge fan of the decentralized draft, and it seemed all but a foregone conclusion that maybe it wouldn't be back next year, but it sounds like it will indeed be back in the decentralized form again this year. Mike, you're shaking your head, so I got to go to you first. What do you think about this?
Well, appropriate for the dog days of the summer, this is a dog of a decision by the NHL. There's a tone deafness on the part of the league, on the part of the general managers, and anybody who watched that travesty that took, 5.5 hours on Friday night to get through the first round. I'm sure that they production-wise can tighten things up a bit, but I'm sorry, this is a situation where I think a lot was lost from the teams not being together in the same place. I mean, people are saying, well, the media is being critical of this because they all want to be in the same place and they all want to go out on the town. It's not that. It's the fact that this was a dog's breakfast. I keep using the analogy. This was a terrible 2 days where there was just no excitement in terms of doing your job as a media member, having Zoom calls and interviewing players after they've been on stage for the first round. And then, there were some technical issues with teams getting their picks in and then players with the Zoom calls afterward. It's just clunky. Maybe it can be improved, but I'm sorry. I think this is a missed opportunity for the league in terms of branding of their players. And I think Gary Bettman is against this, but the owners and the general managers seem to be for it, at least to try to give it another shot. So after the disaster that happens next June, hopefully they'll finally go back to the way it should be.
Yeah, Kelsey, do you think this was just, Mike mentioned the clunkiness and some of the awkwardness of it. Do you think those are the kinds of things that can maybe be rectified after, the first run trial and error? Do you think that it will really be significantly better next year, or is this just kind of what we can expect for the quality of the draft if it stays in this decentralized form?
I mean, in all fairness, this did seem like a first try kind of thing. I think there's small things that they can work around to improving. But in general, having to rely on the technology to work, just having to rely on everything to run smoothly behind the scenes is kind of a risk that you're inherently taking. And it's not foolproof. So, in terms of the actual production quality, I'm not really sure that can improve. And I mean, beyond that too, there's something about these draft picks, being in the same room with the management team and just getting that picture on stage with everybody, shaking hands, that's their moment for them. And that's something, the emotionality of all of it is kind of taken away too, on top of everything that Mike already said. So, there's certain workarounds for maybe some of the glitches and just the format that we saw. But in general, I'm not really sure that this is something they can salvage. Even though the GMs prefer it that way, they like being able to kind of work in their own space and work with their entire teams in that space. But, I think in a general sense, I'm not really sure that there's much improvement to be made here.
Yeah, I'll be honest. I've even been watching the Major League Baseball draft this week, and not only are the GMs and the execs not there in person, but the players aren't even there. And it really just takes a lot of the, like you talk about the emotion and the excitement out of it. And then there's always the clunkiness, always the technical issues with getting guys connected on Zoom or whatever. There's always a delay, so I don't know. Maybe I think we all just kind of prefer the more traditional format here. So we'll see what happens next year. Maybe after another year, the NHL will change their mind again. But for now, looks like we're sticking with this decentralized draft format, for better or for worse. I mentioned the new CBA that kicks in starting in 2026-27. Got a few different elements here that are new as part of this CBA, one of which is the emergency backup goalie situation. So e-bugs, always fun. I remember I was covering the Carolina Hurricanes got to cover the Dave Ayers game. So like big, always fun storylines with that. But stories like that seem to be no longer because e-bugs have now been turned into full-time positions. So you're not going to get a Zamboni driver or an accountant or a janitor or whoever maybe stepping in goal in NHL games anymore. So teams will now have to declare an e-bug 48 hours before the start of the season and 24 hours before each game. So the player will travel with one team to all of the games instead of being just one person assigned to both teams at any given game. So the e-bug must have never played an NHL game before, cannot be someone who has played pro hockey at all in the previous 3 years. Very interesting, very specific criteria here. Mike, what do you think of this addition? I mean, it's not like this is necessarily something that's going to be coming up on a regular basis, I don't think. But what do you think of the idea and the decision here to add full-time e-bugs to these NHL teams?
Well, if I'm a borderline NCAA goaltender, I'm signing up right away. I think the situation in terms of they can't have ever played pro hockey, they can't have ever played an NHL game. I'm not saying you get a ringer in here and all of a sudden Dominic Hasek is showing up as your e-bug, but I think there should be a little bit of an allowance here. I mean, if you're bringing in somebody to be a disaster third goaltender, then I don't see a problem it being somebody who has had some pro experience, especially if it's at the American Hockey League or ECHL level. If you don't want somebody who's a retired NHL goaltender, it's like all of a sudden, somebody's bringing in Marc-Andre Fleury. Of course not. But if we're talking about, somebody like, and I know Dustin Tokarski, he's played NHL games, but somebody like Dustin Tokarski who'd been with numerous AHL teams, remove the NHL, but somebody like that, I don't see a problem with that. But, they have very specific rules here. And I was at the David Ayers game. I covered that game in 2020. And I mean, not only was that a disaster for the Maple Leafs and an embarrassment for them, but the excitement that the Carolina Hurricanes had when he walked into the locker room and they were showering him with beers and whatever, that aspect is gone. That's not going to happen anymore. It's going to be a sort of pat on the back and yeah, we expect this of you. But yeah, I mean, I very stringent rules here. And I think it sort of takes the excitement and the emotion out of the e-bug situation.
I think it's interesting too that they're now going to add this individual for each team to the team's travel party. And now they're going to be traveling. That's more expense that they're going to have to deal with for a player who hopefully you won't ever have to use. I mean, Kelsey, what do you think about the change in this rule?
I think, I agree with what Mike said. I think kind of the emotional aspect is taken out. Like, Gone are the days where you'll have goaltenders running up the highway with all their equipment, trying to get to the arena on time. So, yeah, we won't see those kinds of things anymore. I think in terms of player safety, this kind of makes sense because they can have a guy prepped, for every game. It's the same person, and you don't have to have that janitor or that beer league goaltender just randomly coming to be the e-bug. So I think from a few perspectives, it does make sense. But I kind of agree in the sense that this is an extra expense, as you said. This is for a situation that is rarely, if ever, going to come up for a team. So it almost seems, I don't want to say unnecessary, but it kind of seems almost like an unnecessary assurance for a situation that comes up so rarely as it is. So I think it's an interesting decision, to say the least, but it is a good opportunity for, those amateur goaltenders, those college goaltenders, just guys who never thought they were going to make it into the league. This is kind of a prime opportunity for them. So I think that aspect of it is still kind of there, because I think they kind of kept that provision in there to make sure that that a little bit of that emotionality was still there with it. But in general, I think from a few angles it makes sense when you look at it from player safety, especially. But it's interesting that this is going to be a full-time person traveling with the team for a situation that doesn't even come up very often. So.
Yeah, like I said, ideally never comes up. But then for that person, great, you get to travel with an NHL team all year and not have to do any of the work. So that would maybe be the dream, depending on who you ask. But yeah, definitely interesting to see how this plays out if we do start to see more e-bug action here, now that we know that this is going to be a designated person that's going to be traveling with each team. All right, Kelsey, going to come back to you for this one to start, since we've got you here. One of the few teams that's still busy making moves this week is the Pittsburgh Penguins. So they have gotten a goaltender. They got Arturs Silovs from the Vancouver Canucks for Chase Stillman and a 4th-round pick in 2027. So now we know that Pittsburgh has needed goaltending. Tristan Jarry has just not been consistent, and Alex Nedeljkovic clearly wasn't the answer either. And so that was definitely an area that they really needed to shore up, especially with Nedeljkovic now moving on as well. So looking at Sheiloffs, he had a .931 save percentage and a 2.01 goals against average in 24 AHL playoff games. So he won the Calder Cup with Abbotsford. He was the AHL playoff MVP award this season. Obviously, he first kind of burst onto the scene last year, or I guess now 2 seasons ago, with the Canucks as the 3rd-string goaltender behind Thatcher Demko, Casey DeSmith, and he came in and had himself a little playoff run there. So Kelsey, you've had a front row seat to the goaltending situation, goaltending calamity, as some might call it, in Pittsburgh. Do you think that Sheiloffs is going to be the answer in goal that Pittsburgh is looking for, or do you think that this is kind of a Band-Aid on a bullet hole situation?
I don't necessarily think that it's a Band-Aid on a bullet hole situation. I do think this is a situation where they're throwing some things at the wall and hoping that something sticks. Because if you look at Pittsburgh's prospect goaltending depth, they actually have a few guys that are knocking on the door. Adding Sheiloffs, they already have Yoel Blomqvist, who is pretty much done everything he can at the AHL level and is probably ready to make that jump. They have a pretty good prospect in Sergei Murashov, who's ready for a full-time jump to the AHL level. And there's also Philip Larson, Taylor Gauthier. So they have some guys in their system that are probably also going to be in the mix for some games. Now, what makes this interesting is that because they have so many goaltenders at the same stage of development in their system, this kind of makes you wonder if there's maybe another move coming, whether it's, a prospect being sent with one of their bigger guys in Carlson or Cal Russ, whether it's them moving on from Tristan Jarry, and kind of relying on Sheiloffs and one of those other young goaltenders. So I think there's a little bit of intrigue to this situation beyond the deal itself, because I think for Pittsburgh, this is a good bet to take. Sheiloffs has only played 19 NHL games. He had a really good run in the Calder Cup playoffs last season, was named playoff MVP. So they're kind of taking a good chance on a young guy that profiles pretty similarly to the prospects they already have in their system. So I think this makes the situation more interesting for Pittsburgh because it adds to their prospect depth, but it kind of makes you question what the plan is at the NHL level, given that some of these guys are probably ready to make the jump to the NHL and see some games. So we'll see how that dynamic shakes out. But I like this move by Pittsburgh. I think it helps shore up some young goaltending prospect depth that they, already have. You never have too many goaltenders in your system. So I think Pittsburgh's learning that the last few years.
Yeah, definitely. Everybody's in the market for goaltending, it seems like, at all times. So good position to be in if you're Pittsburgh, I think. Part of me did wonder, Mike, if this was going to be are we setting up for another move to come? Like Kelsey said, to trade one or two of these goaltending prospects that they have? Or do you think it's a situation of Pittsburgh just saying like, hey, open tryout, basically. Like if you want the starting goaltender spot, come earn it because it's open. I mean, what do you make of this situation?
The price was right. I mean, they didn't really give up much. Stillman is sort of a middle of the road prospect at best, former first round pick and the 4th round draft pick. And Vancouver's back, it was against the wall because Sheiloffs was not going to get through waivers. From the Pittsburgh perspective, I mean, I would want to keep Tristan Jarry around because he gives you a better chance of getting Gavin McKenna. He, the way he's played the last few years. I mean, if you're interested in tanking, put him in every game. I was told by a Pittsburgh reporter that the goalie that they really have a lot of hope for is Miroshov, that he played great in a limited window down in Wilkes-Barre, and that they think he's, and it's, he's too young to. And you don't want to expose him to the NHL with that defense and that team and where they're going this year. So maybe he's going to be sheltered in the American Hockey League, and you throw Sheiloffs and Joel Blomqvist and maybe Jarry into the sausage grinder. Sheiloffs played really well in the playoffs, as you know, Emma, against Nashville and then against Edmonton. So, I think he can be an NHL goaltender, but the thing with him is, it's that prejudice against the smaller goaltender. He is not a big goalie. And, can he be a number one? Well, he's going to get an opportunity in Pittsburgh, and plenty of goalies are going to get an opportunity in Pittsburgh. We'll just see what happens.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, Mike, I'm going to stick with you because this is a player that you've got some experience covering in Buffalo. Jeff Skinner finally has signed a 1-year, $3 million deal with the San Jose Sharks. He signed on Friday. So this is a guy who's coming off a season where he had 29 points, 16 goals, 13 assists in 72 games for the Oilers in the regular season. He had a goal and an assist in 5 playoff games for the Oilers as well. So pretty regular, healthy scratch in the postseason as well. Obviously did not really pan out the way either he or Edmonton were expecting or hoping for there. So now looking at his new deal in San Jose, do you think that Skinner can exceed expectations this season, potentially even to be a valuable trade chip for San Jose at the deadline this year?
Well, Jeff Skinner has found his comfort zone. He will play in the top 6 with San Jose, and he will be outside of the playoffs in San Jose, which he is used to, except for last year. And I mean, that may be an unfair crack because he wasn't exactly on great teams in Buffalo and not great teams in Carolina. But in Edmonton, after one game at the beginning of the first round, he just didn't fit into Edmonton's plans. And only when Zach Hyman got hurt against Dallas did he get back in the lineup. I think it's a good fit in the sense that he's going to play top 6 minutes. He's probably going to play with Celebrini or maybe Will Smith. He'll probably get power play time. And if Mike Grier wants to flip him at the deadline, a $3 million salary with the expanding cap is something very movable. I don't know whether teams are exactly looking for a smaller forward who's sort of slowing down in the downslope of his career. But if he has a good year, if he scores 20 goals at the deadline, then somebody's going to want him. So we'll see what happens.
Yeah, Kelsey, what do you think of this? It was starting to get a little interesting there when he hadn't signed anywhere. This was a guy that was going to find a new home eventually, but looking at obviously San Jose being a very young team on the rise here, looking to replace some of the maybe veteran forward presence they had and in guys like Mikhail Granlund, for example, who have since moved on. I mean, how do you think that what do you think Skinner's role will be in San Jose?
Yeah, I mean, like Mike said, I think he's going to play in the top six there. He's going to have the chance to play with some legitimately young, talented players. And I think, he can kind of help mentor these players because I think San Jose, I mean, I'm not going to stretch to say they're going to be a playoff team this year. I don't think that, but they are kind of looking to move forward and take that next step. I don't think they're going to be trying to tank this year. So, if they come around deadline time and he's a valuable trade chip, if he puts up decent numbers alongside these guys, they can use that. But I also think he can be somebody who can help a playoff push if they are in the mix, come season's end. Because, I don't think he's ever going to replicate that 2023-2024 campaign. But you can expect to get 15 to 20 goals out of him. So I think this is a good signing for them because it kind of gives them options come deadline time. He could be a valuable guy to keep around if they're making a push, and for these younger guys as a mentor and as an option in that top six. But if they're still in tank mode and they're still kind of underachieving, I do think he'll have enough value to at least flip for a pick at the deadline and hopefully give them some leverage heading into 2026, 2027. So I think this is a low risk signing and a good one for them.
And the one thing that Mike Grier has done with all the signings that they made and bring in Nick Leddy on defense and now Skinner, he's buying time for some of those young prospects, for Sam Dickinson, for Misa if he doesn't make the team this year. They not Quentin Musty, another really good prospect. They don't have to throw them right into the NHL right away. They're buying them a year. Let these veterans play. Let them either absorb the losses or whatever they do. But then next year they have one more year of experience in the American Hockey League or in junior, and they're more prepared for the NHL.
For sure. Mike, you mentioned the rising cap, talking about Skinner here and, how that's going to make his salary more movable at the deadline if the Sharks do decide to go that route. A lot of teams here very, very excited about the rising cap. I think some maybe no more so than the Minnesota Wild because they've got a pretty big name coming up on free agency here, and that is Kirill Kaprizov. So Bill Guerin in Minnesota has been very vocal in the past about being willing to pay Kaprizov really whatever he wants to stay with the team, essentially handing him a blank check and saying, we'll do what we can to keep you here. Knowing that Kaprizov's contract is going to expire at the end of next season or this coming season. He's been eligible technically to sign an extension with Minnesota since July 1st, obviously has not done that yet. But again, knowing that Minnesota's got some other bits of business to tidy up here. For example, what are they going to do with Marco Rossi? That's kind of a big one that is hanging over a lot of people's heads right now. But I think if you look at the situation in Minnesota with Kaprizov, I mean, there are so many big name free agents that are set to hit the market in 2026. I mean, not just Kaprizov, but you've got McDavid, Eichel, Panarin, Kyle Connor, Adrian Kempe, etc. I mean, this upcoming free agent class is going to be the polar opposite of the one that we just saw, the one that we've just had this season. So a lot of big names here. Looking at the situation with Kaprizov, and all of these other names that are still at this point going to be on the market. Mike, do you think that Kaprizov ends up with the highest or one of the highest AAVs at the end of all of this, or is there any chance you think that he leaves Minnesota?
Well, one optimistic thing for the Minnesota Wild, Kaprizov's agent is not Darren Ferris, because if it was, he'd be going to free agency next July. I mean, the first thing that Bill Guerin has to determine is, does he want to come back to Minnesota? We heard those rumors last year about he wants to go to Chicago, or he wants to go to the Rangers to play with Panarin. They have to determine and find out whether he wants to come back, whether he wants to sign there long term. I have no reason to doubt that he does until I hear otherwise. The next hurdle then would be, will he be one of the highest paid players in the league? Well, if you're talking about AAV, probably he will be, but in terms of percentage of cap, and that's the thing that we always have to look at now. I mean, I think he's going to make more than Mikko Rantanen's $12 million or Mitch Marner's $12 million. He could be the highest paid winger in the league, but he's not going to make more than Draisaitl, and he's not going to make more than McDavid or Eichel on their contracts, and they're coming up the same year that he's coming up. So if he, for his position, if he is the highest paid player, I think he should be satisfied with that, but we know how it gets when it gets closer to July 1st. So, I mean, that will evolve as the year goes on.
Yeah, Kelsey, what do you think about this? I mean, this is going to be a fascinating free agency, I think, if especially right now with all of these guys still, eligible to sign extensions, and people are starting to panic. Oh, they were eligible July 1st and they still haven't signed. Well, it's July 14th. So it's, they've still got some time. But I think, what do you make of this market, and how do you think Kaprizov is going to fare here on the market, and is he going to end up staying in Minnesota?
I think he does end up staying. I mean, they have the room to keep him. They'll have the room to keep him. And I also think, just in general, it's going to be interesting to see how some of these contending teams kind of handle the rising cap, and what these players think, how much these players think they can get out of this, and how high they think they can go. I think it might be a situation where maybe he waits it out just to see, what other players are being paid. I think there is going to be a little bit of a waiting game on everybody's part, just to kind of see what the contract handouts are going to be, because I know we might talk about this later, but some of these contracts that were handed out this offseason were, a lot more than people were expecting. They're already overcompensating for the fact that the cap's going to continue to rise. So I do think it's very possible that he will be the highest paid winger. I agree with Mike on that front. Could make more than Mitch Marner, Mikko Rantanen. But as far as some of these other names, I don't think he's going to make Draisaitl money or McDavid money, like you mentioned. But I do think it is going to be a waiting game. These guys are probably going to wait it out a little bit just to see how high they can go. Especially in Kaprizov's situation, where I don't think it's a surefire of a bet that he stays in Minnesota. I think he's going to stay there. But I also think some of that depends on what direction the team decides to take. This was they finished fourth in the Central last year, so it'll be kind of interesting to see what their trajectory is this season too. So I'll be watching that with waiting eyes, and I think a lot of people will be watching how long it takes to get some of these extensions signed for these guys, because I think this is still a feeling out process for a lot of NHL GMs, just in terms of how to combat the cap situation.
Yeah, for the GMs and for the agents as well, I think, talking about, you mentioned, Kelsey, about teams overcompensating now for the rising cap, but I mean, now you're also starting to see more of those sort of shorter term, higher AAV deals, because that is that's the agents trying to feel this out. It's like, well, let's not commit long term until we see how this shakes out with the cap going up. So we could see a lot more Austin Matthews type deals, the shorter term, larger AAV. I think that's going to become a lot more common here as the cap starts to go up in these next few years. All right. Mike, earlier you mentioned Pittsburgh as being one of the teams that could potentially be tanking for McKenna. I do not think that they will be the only ones. Elliot Friedman reported earlier in the offseason that a lot of teams are really hesitant to give up their first round picks in 2026 in potential trades because they knew that any first round pick in 2026 carried the opportunity to draft Gavin McKenna. So obviously knowing that he's going to be the hot commodity, the belle of the ball at the draft next year, looking at all the teams that are going to be wanting to fight over him, Mike, which team do you think needs Gavin McKenna the most?
Right here in River City, the Buffalo Sabres, because I think the fan base has drifted from anger to apathy. I think that they've had one of the more underwhelming off seasons. Justin Danforth and Alex Lyon do not strike me as the key to making the playoffs. And they traded the best player in the Peterka deal, and we have the Byram situation still hanging over them. I mean, don't get me wrong. Chicago could use them as a partner for Bedard, or San Jose with their young forwards. And obviously, I think, I'll let Kelsey answer for herself, but Pittsburgh, Lemieux to Crosby to McKenna. I mean, there you go. But Buffalo needs an infusion of excitement. And if he is as good as a lot of people think he is, then they need that type of player.
Yeah, Kelsey, if you can give as unbiased of an answer as you can here for which team you think could use Gavin McKenna the most. I'm sure there's no team that would say, no, thanks, we don't want him. But whether it's Pittsburgh or any other team, I mean, what are your thoughts here?
Yeah, so I actually I agree with Michael. I think that the Buffalo Sabres need him the most for a lot of reasons, and all the reasons he just said. But I'm sorry, I gotta throw a bone for the Penguins too, because they have this 21-year cycle going. If they draft McKenna next season, there was 21 years between Lemieux and Crosby. There would have been 21 years between Crosby and McKenna. But I think the thing that's interesting about Pittsburgh in particular is the situation they're in, because Kyle Dubas keeps reiterating that he wants to get this rebuild done as urgently as possible. But at the same time, he's kind of refusing to put a timeline on it. And that's understandable. But, I think a player like McKenna kind of gives them the ammunition they need to kind of go for it for Crosby's final years in the NHL. Because right now, I mean, they have a lot of complementary pieces in their system. I think they have a lot of guys who can fill out a roster and be nice top six complementary players, middle six complementary players. They have some nice prospect depth on the blue line, but they still don't have that star in their system. They still don't have that franchise guy in their system. And this would be such a nice passing of the torch moment from Crosby to McKenna. And it also gives Crosby one more chance to really compete in the playoffs and make a run. I think that's just something that's good for hockey. It's good for Pittsburgh, but it's good for hockey when Crosby is competing for Stanley Cups. So I think from that kind of perspective, from a storybook perspective, and just where the Penguins are at in their rebuild, and where they want to go with their rebuild, they need McKenna. But I would have to agree with Mike just for the reasons he said. I think Buffalo really just needs a player like this and needs a guy that's going to stick around for the long haul, be that face of the franchise, and give that fan base some hope, because they definitely need it over there.
Yeah, I would go with Buffalo and Pittsburgh ahead of the team that I think a lot of people are going to keep their eye on when it comes to the Gavin McKenna sweepstakes, and that's Chicago. You mentioned it, but I think that, a lot of people are looking at Chicago thinking, okay, well, you need to build a competitive team around Connor Bedard. You've got this generational talent, and you're not showing any sense of urgency in building a team around him. Well, if you put your tinfoil hat on, you might start to think, well, maybe that's all on purpose. They're doing that because they're trying to get Gavin McKenna next year and go for the next, they've already got their Jonathan Taves. Now they need their Patrick Kane to kind of go with that next dynasty. So again, not saying I necessarily agree with that, but I think that there's, there could be some smoke there when it comes to Chicago. So definitely a lot of teams to keep an eye on when it comes to the Gavin McKenna sweepstakes, which will be an ongoing storyline for the rest of this offseason and well into next season as well. So we will certainly be coming back and checking in on that from time to time. For now, though, that is going to do it for today's episode of the Wraparound. Thank you, as always, to all of our viewers and listeners for joining us, listening to us talk some hockey today. We do appreciate it. Thank you, of course, to Sticks.com for sponsoring us. For Kelsey Surmacz and Mike Augello, I am Emma Lingan. This is the Wraparound, and we will see you next time.